The morning of March 15th, 1983 started like any other routine cargo flight. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her headset one final time as she settled into the navigator's seat of the massive C-130 Hercules. The aircraft's 4 turboprop engines hummed with their familiar mechanical symphony, a sound she'd grown to love over her 3 years of military service. At 24 years old, Maria had already logged hundreds of hours as a navigator, but today would be different. Today would test every skill she'd ever learned and push her far beyond anything her training had prepared her for. The crew briefing that morning had been standard procedure. Captain James Mitchell, a veteran pilot with over 4,000 flight hours, outlined their mission: transport medical supplies and personnel from Ramstein Air Base in Germany to a forward operating base in the Middle East. It was a humanitarian mission, the kind that reminded everyone why they served. Co-pilot Lieutenant David Chen, known for his meticulous attention to detail, ran through the weather reports and flight path calculations. Everything looked routine. "Santos," Captain Mitchell had said, glancing over at Maria with a slight smile, "hope you're ready for another milk run. 8 hours there, quick turnaround, 8 hours back. Should be smooth sailing all the way." Maria had nodded, her dark eyes focused on the navigation chart spread before her. She'd traced their route with her finger, noting alternate landing strips and emergency protocols. It was habit more than necessity. She could fly this route with her eyes closed, but something her instructor at navigation school had always said stuck with her. The day you stop preparing for the worst is the day the worst finds you. The C-130 was loaded with 28 tons of medical supplies and equipment, along with 6 medical personnel heading to provide aid in a region devastated by recent conflicts. The cargo bay was packed efficiently, every item secured according to strict military specifications. To many, it was just another transport mission. To the people waiting for those supplies, it was a lifeline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As they taxied toward the runway, Maria performed her final pre-flight checks. Her navigation station was equipped with the most advanced systems available in 1983, though compared to today's technology, it would seem primitive. She had multiple radio beacons, a basic GPS system that was still relatively new, and most importantly, her charts and compass. In the military, redundancy wasn't just recommended, it was survival. The takeoff was textbook perfect. Captain Mitchell's experienced hands guided the 175,000-pound aircraft into the sky with the smooth confidence of someone who'd done it thousands of times. Lieutenant Chen called out airspeeds and altitude markers with clockwork precision. Maria tracked their progress against her flight plan, noting wind speeds and adjusting their estimated arrival time. For the first 4 hours, everything proceeded exactly as planned. They climbed to their cruising altitude of 28,000 feet and settled into the steady rhythm of long-distance flight. The medical team in the cargo area had settled in for the journey, some reading, others catching up on much-needed sleep. The aircraft's heating system kept the cabin comfortable, despite the frigid temperatures outside. Maria found herself thinking about her family back home in Texas. Her parents had been skeptical when she'd announced her intention to join the Air Force. "It's no place for a woman," her father had said, though not unkindly. He was from a different generation, one where women's roles were more narrowly defined. But Maria had always been drawn to aviation, spending countless hours as a child watching planes take off and land at the small regional airport near her hometown. Her breakthrough came during high school when she participated in a career day presentation by an Air Force recruiter. The sergeant, a woman named Patricia Williams, had talked about opportunities for women in aviation. She said, "We need navigators, smart ones, the kind who can think on their feet and stay calm under pressure." That conversation had changed Maria's life. She'd enlisted immediately after graduation, excelled in basic training, and been selected for navigation school. The training was intense. Mathematics, meteorology, geography, and endless hours practicing with instruments and charts. But she'd thrived in the structured environment, finishing third in her class of 47. Now, 3 years later, she was living her dream. She was part of a crew that made a difference, delivering aid to those who needed it most. The work was meaningful, and she'd earned the respect of her colleagues through competence and reliability. Captain Mitchell had specifically requested her for this mission, and that recognition meant everything to her. As they crossed into international airspace, Maria updated their position with air traffic control and confirmed their flight path for the next leg of the journey. The radio chatter was routine, professional exchanges between pilots and controllers managing the complex dance of aircraft across European skies. "Looking good, Santos," Captain Mitchell called back to her. "Right on schedule, right on course. This might be the smoothest run we've had all month." Lieutenant Chen laughed. "Don't jinx it, sir. We've still got 4 hours to go." None of them could have predicted what was about to unfold. In less than 30 minutes, their routine cargo flight would become a fight for survival that would test every skill Maria had ever learned and demand courage she didn't know she possessed.
The first sign of trouble came at 1:47 p.m., cruising over the Austrian Alps. Maria was updating her navigation logs when she heard Captain Mitchell's voice change, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who'd flown with experienced pilots. The easy confidence was still there, but underneath was a note of concern. "Chen, check the engine readings on number 3, Mitchell said, his voice steady but focused. "I'm seeing some fluctuations here." Lieutenant Chen's hands moved quickly across his instrument panel, his eyes scanning the array of gauges and digital displays. "Confirming irregular readings on engine 3, sir. Temperature's climbing and I'm seeing pressure variations." Maria looked up from her charts, her training kicking in automatically. Engine problems weren't uncommon on long flights, especially with the older C-130 models. The aircraft was designed to handle the loss of one engine, even two under certain circumstances, but any deviation from normal operations required immediate attention and careful monitoring. Throttling back on 3, Captain Mitchell announced, his experienced hands making precise adjustments to the engine controls. "Let's see if we can stabilize it." For several minutes, it seemed like the issue might resolve itself. The temperature readings stabilized and the pressure variations decreased. This kind of minor engine trouble was something all 3 crew members had dealt with before. It meant adjusting flight parameters, possibly reducing altitude and keeping a closer eye on systems, but it wasn't necessarily dangerous. Maria continued plotting their course, but now she was also identifying alternate landing sites along their route. Vienna was behind them, but there were several suitable airports ahead: Prague, Budapest, or if necessary, they could turn back to Ramstein. Her mind automatically began calculating fuel consumption rates with the compromised engine, determining how their reduced efficiency might affect their range and options. The medical team in the cargo bay remained unaware of the developing situation. This was intentional. There was no point in alarming passengers when the crew was handling what appeared to be a manageable problem. Captain Mitchell's philosophy was simple: keep everyone informed on a need-to-know basis, and right now, they needed to know that their pilots were professional and capable. "How's our fuel situation looking, Santos?" Maria quickly ran the calculations, factoring in their current consumption rate and the reduced efficiency from engine 3. "We're still within normal parameters for the mission, sir. If we need to divert, Prague would be our best option, approximately 90 minutes at current speed and altitude." "Good. Let's hope it doesn't come to that." But 20 minutes later, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Engine 3 didn't just malfunction, it failed catastrophically. A loud bang echoed through the aircraft, followed by violent shaking that rattled every piece of equipment not bolted down. Through the small windows, Maria could see smoke and flames streaming from the number 3 engine. "Engine fire on 3!" Lieutenant Chen shouted, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. Captain Mitchell's response was immediate and professional. "Shutting down engine 3, feathering prop. Chen, run the engine fire checklist." The C-130 shuddered and yawed as the failed engine created drag and asymmetric thrust. Mitchell fought the controls, his experience evident in how quickly he compensated for the aircraft's new flight characteristics. The remaining 3 engines were more than capable of maintaining flight, but the workload on the crew had just increased exponentially. Maria's job now became critical. With one engine down, their fuel consumption calculations had changed dramatically. Their range was reduced, their alternate airport options were fewer, and every decision carried more weight. She worked quickly, updating their position, calculating new arrival times, and identifying the closest suitable airports for an emergency landing. "Prague is still our best diversion option, 78 minutes at current speed and altitude. Do you want me to contact approach control?" "Not yet. Mitchell replied, his attention focused on maintaining stable flight. "Let's see how she handles with 3 engines. If everything else stays normal, we might be able to continue to our destination." This was classic Captain Mitchell. Conservative when it came to safety, but not unnecessarily cautious. He understood that their mission was important, that the medical supplies they carried could save lives. If the aircraft was capable of completing the mission safely, he wanted to press on. Lieutenant Chen had finished the engine fire checklist, confirming that the fire suppression system had successfully extinguished the flames. The failed engine was shut down and feathered, its propeller blades turned edge-on to the airstream to minimize drag. All other engine parameters looked normal. For 30 minutes, it seemed like their problems might be manageable. The C-130 flew steadily on 3 engines, albeit at reduced speed and efficiency. Maria continued updating their position and fuel status, while Chen monitored all engine parameters with heightened vigilance. Captain Mitchell had settled into the rhythm of flying an asymmetric aircraft, making constant small corrections to maintain their heading. The atmosphere in the cockpit had shifted from routine professionalism to focused concentration. Every crew member understood that their margin for error had decreased. They were no longer flying a routine cargo mission, they were managing an emergency that required constant attention and flawless execution. Maria found herself thinking about her emergency procedures training, mentally reviewing protocols for various scenarios. Her instructors had drilled into her the importance of staying ahead of the aircraft, not just knowing where they were, but anticipating where they needed to be and what resources they'd need to get there safely. She had no idea that in just minutes, all of that training would be put to the ultimate test in ways she could never have imagined. At 2:43 p.m., flying over the rugged terrain of eastern Austria, their manageable emergency became a catastrophic crisis. Maria was in the middle of updating their estimated fuel remaining when she heard Lieutenant Chen's sharp intake of breath. "Sir, I'm showing problems with engine number 1 now," Chen reported, his voice tight with concern. "Oil pressure is dropping fast and temperature is climbing." Captain Mitchell's jaw tightened. Losing 1 engine was manageable. Losing 2 engines on the same side of the aircraft would create severe control problems and dramatically reduce their options. "Talk to me, Chen. How bad is it?" "Oil pressure down to 15 psi and falling. Temperature redlined and climbing." Chen's hands moved quickly across his controls, trying to coax better performance from the failing engine. "I don't think it's going to make it much longer, sir." Maria's mind raced through the implications. 2 engines down on the left side would create massive asymmetric thrust, making the aircraft difficult to control and significantly reducing their range. She immediately began calculating their options with only 2 engines, her fingers working quickly across her navigation equipment. "Prague is now mandatory," she announced. "With 2 engines down, we won't have enough fuel to reach our original destination. I'm calculating 53 minutes to Prague at best glide speed." "Understood. Chen, send a mayday call to Prague approach. Tell them we're declaring an emergency and requesting immediate vectors for landing." But before Chen could reach for his radio, engine number 1 made the decision for them. With a grinding shriek of metal on metal, followed by another violent explosion, the second engine failed completely. This time the failure was even more violent than the first, and pieces of the engine cowling were torn away by the slipstream. The C-130 immediately began rolling left, the asymmetric thrust from the 2 remaining engines on the right side trying to flip the aircraft over. Captain Mitchell fought the controls, his muscles straining against the enormous forces trying to tear the plane apart. His experience and strength were the only things keeping them in controlled flight. "Both left engines are gone," Chen shouted into his radio. "Mayday! Mayday! Mayday! Air Force 772 declaring emergency. We've lost both port engines and are requesting immediate vectors to Prague." The response from Prague Approach Control was immediate and professional. "Air Force 772, Prague Approach. We copy your mayday. Turn right heading 090, descend and maintain flight level 200. Emergency services are being alerted." Maria's training took over completely. With 2 engines down, every calculation mattered. She worked frantically to determine their glide range, identify alternate airports, and planned the most efficient descent profile. The mathematics were unforgiving. They had enough altitude and airspeed to reach Prague, but there was no margin for error. "Captain, I'm showing Prague at 47 minutes if we maintain current airspeed, but we need to start our descent soon to conserve fuel."
Mitchell was fighting a constant battle with the controls, using rudder trim and throttle adjustments on the remaining engines to maintain heading. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool cabin temperature. Begin descent checklist. We're going to shoot straight into Prague. What happened next changed everything forever. Captain Mitchell had been fighting the asymmetric thrust for nearly 10 minutes when Maria noticed something wrong. His speech had become slightly slurred, and his head movements seemed uncoordinated. At first, she attributed it to the physical strain of controlling the damaged aircraft, but her medical training, a requirement for all navigators, told her something else might be happening. "Captain, are you feeling all right?" she asked, studying his profile carefully. "Just tired," Mitchell replied, but his voice was weaker than it had been moments before. "This bird is fighting me pretty hard." Lieutenant Chen glanced over at his commander and immediately saw what Maria had noticed. Captain Mitchell's face was pale, and there was a slight tremor in his hands that had nothing to do with aircraft vibration. "Sir, maybe you should let me take the controls for a few minutes," Chen suggested, diplomatically. But before Mitchell could respond, his left hand went to his chest and his face contorted in pain. The aircraft immediately began to roll left as his grip on the controls loosened. "I've got it!" Chen shouted, grabbing his yoke and fighting to level the aircraft. But something was wrong with Chen, too. As he took control, Maria saw his face had gone ashen and beads of perspiration covered his forehead. "Chen, are you?" But her question was answered when the co-pilot suddenly slumped forward over his controls. In the span of 30 seconds, both pilots had been incapacitated. Later investigation would reveal that both men had suffered from acute hypoxia, a lack of oxygen to the brain caused by a malfunction in the aircraft's pressurization system that had gone undetected during the engine failures. The condition had struck them simultaneously, leaving them barely conscious and completely unable to fly the aircraft. The massive C-130, carrying 28 tons of cargo and 6 passengers, was now flying itself toward the ground with no one on the controls. Maria Santos, the 24-year-old navigator who had been dismissed as some as just cargo herself, was the only crew member still fully conscious and capable of action. In that moment, everything she had ever learned, every hour of training, every lesson about staying calm under pressure would be put to the ultimate test. The lives of everyone on board now depended entirely on her.
The silence in the cockpit was deafening. For a moment that felt like an eternity, Maria Santos stared at the unconscious forms of Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Chen, her mind struggling to process the impossible situation. The C-130 was gradually descending, its nose dropping as the aircraft began to lose lift without active pilot input. The sound of rushing air through the cabin grew louder, and she could feel the sickening sensation of the plane beginning an uncontrolled descent. Training kicked in before panic could take hold. Maria unbuckled herself from the navigator station and moved quickly to the pilot's seat. Captain Mitchell was unconscious but breathing, his face a pale gray color that confirmed her suspicions about oxygen deprivation. She reached across him to grab the controls, immediately feeling the enormous forces trying to tear the aircraft apart. The physical strength required to fly a damaged C-130 was immense. These were not modern fly-by-wire aircraft with computer assistance. Every input required direct physical force transmitted through cables and hydraulics to massive control surfaces. Maria's 125-pound frame was now responsible for controlling 175,000 pounds of aircraft with 2 engines gone and major asymmetric thrust. "Okay, Maria, think," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "First things first, oxygen masks." She reached up and deployed the emergency oxygen masks, first securing one over Captain Mitchell's face, then Lieutenant Chen's, and finally her own. The flow of pure oxygen immediately helped clear her thinking and confirmed that hypoxia had indeed been the cause of the pilot's incapacitation. With oxygen flowing, she turned her attention to the aircraft's attitude and altitude. They were now descending through 18,000 feet at an alarming rate, and the airspeed was climbing toward dangerous levels.
The asymmetric thrust from the two remaining right-side engines was constantly trying to roll the aircraft left, and only her constant pressure on the controls was preventing a complete loss of control. Prague approach, this is Air Force 772. Both my pilots are unconscious. I am the navigator, and I have assumed control of the aircraft. The response from air traffic control was immediate, but she could hear the shock in the controller's voice. Air Force 772? Did you say both pilots are unconscious? Affirmative, Prague. I believe they suffered hypoxia from our pressurization system. I am a qualified navigator but have never piloted a C-130. I need immediate assistance. What happened next was one of the most remarkable displays of international aviation cooperation ever recorded. Within minutes, Prague Approach Control had patched Maria through to an emergency frequency where a retired C-130 pilot, Colonel William Harrison, happened to be working as a civilian air traffic controller. Sergeant Santos, this is Colonel Harrison. I flew C-130s for 23 years. I'm going to talk you through this step by step. First, I need to know your current altitude, airspeed, and configuration. Maria quickly scanned the instruments, calling out readings while simultaneously fighting to maintain level flight. Altitude, 16,200 feet and descending, airspeed 185 knots and climbing, engines 1 and 3 are shut down, engines 2 and 4 are operational. Outstanding, Sergeant. You're doing great. First thing, we need to reduce your descent rate. Gently pull back on the yoke and add power to engines 2 and 4. The aircraft will want to roll left, so you'll need to hold right rudder and right aileron to compensate. Following Harrison's instructions, Maria made the control inputs. The aircraft's descent rate decreased, but the physical effort required was enormous. Her arms were already beginning to ache from the constant pressure needed to keep the plane level. Meanwhile, in the cargo bay, the medical team had realized something was seriously wrong. The violent maneuvers and the sound of rushing air had awakened everyone, and the deployment of oxygen masks had confirmed their worst fears. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the senior medical officer, made her way to the cockpit and was shocked to see Maria at the controls. "What's the situation?" Dr. Walsh asked, immediately beginning to assess the condition of the unconscious pilots. "Both pilots are down, probably hypoxia. I'm trying to get us to Prague, but I've never flown anything this big before." Dr. Walsh quickly checked both pilots' vital signs. They're stable, but definitely suffering from oxygen deprivation. The masks should help, but it might be a while before they regain consciousness. This meant Maria was truly on her own. She was now responsible not just for her own survival, but for the lives of everyone on board. 8 souls total, counting herself. "Colonel Harrison, I'm maintaining level flight at 15,800 feet, but it's taking all my strength to keep her straight. How long can I maintain this?" Harrison's voice remained calm and encouraging. "You're doing exceptional work, Sergeant. We're going to get you down safely. Prague Airport is clearing all runways and rolling emergency equipment. I need you to start a very gentle descent toward Prague. We're going to take this one step at a time." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Over the next 30 minutes, Colonel Harrison guided Maria through the most challenging flight of her life. They had to manage not just the basic aircraft control, but also fuel management, navigation corrections, and preparation for landing approach. Every few minutes, Maria had to overcome the aircraft's tendency to roll left, fighting forces that would have challenged even experienced pilots. "Sergeant, I need you to start configuring for landing," Harrison instructed as they approached Prague's airspace. "This is going to be the most challenging part. You'll need to lower the landing gear, extend flaps, and reduce power while maintaining control of the aircraft." Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from physical exhaustion. She had been fighting the controls for nearly an hour, and the constant muscle tension was taking its toll. But her determination never wavered. Too many people were counting on her to give up. As Prague's airport came into view through the cockpit windows, Maria felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that they had made it this far, terror at what lay ahead. Landing a C-130 under normal circumstances required extensive training and experience. Attempting it with 2 engines out, after an hour of fighting asymmetric thrust, while having never piloted the aircraft before, was beyond anything covered in any manual. "Sergeant Santos, you're doing magnificently," Colonel Harrison's voice crackled through her headset. "Prague Tower has cleared all other traffic. You have the entire airport to yourself. We're going to bring you straight in on runway 24. It's their longest runway at 12,000 feet." Through her headset, Maria could hear multiple voices coordinating her emergency landing. Prague Approach Control, Fire and Rescue Services, airport management, and medical teams were all working together to give her the best possible chance of success. The international aviation community had rallied around this young navigator who had found herself in an impossible situation. "Colonel, my pilots are starting to show signs of consciousness," Dr. Walsh reported behind Maria's seat. "But they're still very disoriented and weak." Captain Mitchell had indeed begun to stir, the oxygen mask helping to restore normal brain function, but when he tried to assess the situation, his movements were still uncoordinated and his speech was slurred. It was clear he would not be able to resume piloting duties. "Mitchell, stay still," Maria called back to him without taking her eyes off the instruments. "I've got the aircraft. Just rest and let the oxygen work." The captain's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. His navigator, the young woman he had mentored and trusted, was now piloting his aircraft through an emergency landing. In any other circumstances, he would have insisted on taking control despite his condition, but he was experienced enough to recognize that Maria had been flying the plane successfully for over an hour, and any change in control could be catastrophic. "Maria," he whispered through his oxygen mask, his voice barely audible, "you can do this. I believe in you." Those words gave Maria a surge of confidence just as Colonel Harrison began talking her through the landing approach procedures. "All right, Sergeant, we're going to start our approach. First, reduce power on both engines and begin a gentle descent. Your target approach speed is going to be 130 knots. The aircraft will be much more difficult to control at slower speeds, so be ready." Maria eased back on the throttles and felt the aircraft's nose drop slightly. Immediately, the effects of asymmetric thrust became more pronounced. With less airspeed, the control surfaces were less effective, and the aircraft wanted to roll left even more aggressively than before. "Colonel, she's getting very difficult to control," Maria reported, her voice strained with effort. "I know, Sergeant, that's normal. Use whatever control inputs you need to maintain wings level. Don't worry about being gentle with the controls. This aircraft is built to handle heavy inputs." As they descended through 8,000 feet, Prague Airport looked impossibly small through the windscreen. The runway that had seemed adequate on the charts now appeared to be a narrow strip surrounded by buildings and obstacles. Maria could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles positioned along the runway, dozens of fire trucks, ambulances, and rescue equipment. "Landing gear down," Harrison instructed. "There's a lever on your left side panel. Pull it down and confirm 3 green lights." Finding the landing gear lever took precious seconds that felt like hours. When Maria finally located it and pulled, the aircraft shuddered as the massive landing gear extended into the slipstream. The additional drag and changed aerodynamics made the aircraft even more difficult to control. 3 green lights, she confirmed, seeing the indicators that all landing gear was properly extended and locked. "Excellent. Now we need to extend flaps to approach setting. You'll see a flap indicator on the center panel. Move it to approach position." Each configuration change made the aircraft more challenging to handle. The flaps increased lift, but also created drag and changed the aircraft's balance. Maria found herself making constant control inputs, her arms burning with fatigue, but her focus absolutely unwavering.
You're lined up perfectly with runway 24, Harrison encouraged. Altitude 3,000 feet, airspeed 135 knots. You're doing everything right. But Maria could see they were coming in too fast and too high. Her approach wasn't going to work. They would overshoot the runway and crash into the buildings beyond. Colonel, I don't think I can make this approach. I'm too high and too fast. No problem, Sergeant. We're going to execute a go-around. Add full power to both engines, raise the nose, and climb back to 4,000 feet. We'll set up for another approach. The go-around was terrifying. Adding full power to the asymmetric engines created enormous control forces that nearly overwhelmed Maria's ability to maintain control. For several seconds, the aircraft rolled violently to the left before she could compensate with full right rudder and aileron. I've got it, she called out, more to reassure herself than anyone else. As they climbed away from Prague Airport for another approach, Maria realized that her arms and shoulders were cramping from the constant physical effort. She had now been fighting the controls for nearly 2 hours, and her body was reaching its limits. Dr. Walsh, recognizing the situation, positioned herself behind Maria's seat. Let me massage your shoulders between control inputs, she offered. You need to stay as fresh as possible for the landing. It was an unusual scene. A military doctor providing physical therapy to a navigator who was piloting a transport aircraft through an emergency approach. But in crisis situations, normal procedures give way to whatever is necessary for survival.
The second approach began with Maria having a much better understanding of how the crippled C-130 handled in landing configuration. Colonel Harrison talked her through a wider, more stable approach pattern that would give her more time to make corrections and adjustments. This time, we're going to start our descent earlier and farther out, Harrison explained. I want you to think of this as a very gentle, gradual slope down to the runway. Don't worry about being precise. That runway is 12,000 feet long, which gives you plenty of room for error. As they turned onto their final approach, Maria could see Prague Airport spread out before them. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the runways. Every emergency vehicle in the city seemed to be positioned along runway 24, their flashing lights creating a corridor of safety leading to the touchdown zone. Captain Mitchell had regained enough consciousness to understand what was happening, though he remained too weak to take control. He watched his navigator with a mixture of pride and amazement as she demonstrated skills he didn't know she possessed. Maria, he managed to say, his voice stronger but still strained, remember what we practiced in the simulator about crosswind landings. Use whatever control inputs you need. Don't try to be pretty, just get us on the ground safely. Lieutenant Chen was also beginning to recover, though he remained largely disoriented. The oxygen masks had helped both pilots, but the effects of hypoxia would take time to fully resolve. 5 miles out, aligned with the runway centerline, Harrison announced. Airspeed 140 knots, altitude 2,800 feet. You're looking perfect, Sergeant. Maria's hands were cramped into claws around the control yoke, but her focus remained absolute. Every instrument scan, every minor correction, every radio call was executed with precision that would have impressed her instructors. The young woman who had been dismissed by some as just cargo was demonstrating airmanship that veteran pilots would respect. 3 miles out, you're slightly left of centerline, make a gentle correction to the right. The correction required careful coordination of rudder and aileron inputs to avoid over-controlling. Maria made the adjustment smoothly, bringing the aircraft back to the runway centerline without inducing any unwanted rolling or yawing motion. 2 miles out, you're looking excellent. Start reducing power gradually and let the nose drop slightly. We want to be at 130 knots when we cross the runway threshold. This was the most critical phase of the approach. Too much power reduction would cause them to drop short of the runway. Too little, and they would overshoot again. Maria made small, incremental power adjustments while monitoring their descent path through the windscreen. 1 mile out.
Airspeed 132 knots. You're right on the glide path. You're about to save everyone's lives, Sergeant. The runway was rushing up to meet them now. Maria could see individual markings on the pavement, could make out the faces of emergency personnel watching from their vehicles. The aircraft was stable, aligned with the runway, and descending at the correct angle. 500 feet. Looking perfect. Slight power reduction. Let the nose come up just a bit. 400 feet. You're doing great. 300 feet. Start your flare. Gently pull back on the yoke. We want to kiss the runway, not slam into it. Maria began the flare maneuver, gradually pulling back on the controls to reduce their descent rate and transition from a descending approach to level flight just above the runway. This was the most difficult part of any landing, requiring perfect timing and coordination. 200 feet. Perfect flare. Hold it right there. 100 feet, you're about to touch down. Hold that attitude. Let the aircraft settle. The main landing gear touched the runway with barely a bump, one of the smoothest landings Maria had ever experienced, even as a passenger. The aircraft bounced slightly as the asymmetric thrust tried to pull them left, but Maria was ready for it, applying right rudder and brake to maintain directional control. "We're down! We're down!" she called out, her voice filled with relief and amazement. But the landing wasn't complete yet. The C-130 was still rolling down the runway at over 100 knots, and controlling the aircraft on the ground with asymmetric thrust was nearly as challenging as flying it. Gently apply brakes, maintain directional control with rudder, Harrison coached. You've got 12,000 feet of runway, so don't rush it. Maria applied brake pressure carefully, feeling the aircraft slow down while fighting the constant tendency to veer left. Emergency vehicles began following them down the runway, ready to respond if anything went wrong during the landing roll. After what felt like an eternity but was actually less than a minute, the massive transport aircraft finally came to a complete stop on Prague's runway. Maria's hands were shaking as she reached up to shut down the remaining engines, following Harrison's instructions to complete the post-landing checklist. Air Force 772, Prague Tower, the controller's voice crackled through the radio. Welcome to Prague. That was the finest piece of airmanship I've ever witnessed. The cockpit erupted in cheers from the medical team, and even Captain Mitchell managed to reach over and squeeze Maria's shoulder. Outstanding job, Sergeant. Outstanding. Through the cockpit windows, Maria could see dozens of emergency personnel approaching the aircraft, their faces filled with amazement and respect. In just over 2 hours, she had transformed from a navigator doing routine duty to a pilot who had accomplished one of the most remarkable emergency landings in aviation history. But Maria Santos wasn't done yet. The most challenging part of her story was still ahead.
As the engine spooled down and silence finally returned to the cockpit, Maria Santos remained frozen in the pilot's seat, her hands still gripping the controls. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the most harrowing 2 hours of her life was beginning to fade, replaced by a combination of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief at what she had just accomplished. Emergency personnel swarmed the aircraft within minutes. Fire and rescue teams positioned their vehicles around the C-130, while medical crews prepared to assess the condition of everyone on board. The first person up the crew ladder was Prague Airport's emergency coordinator, followed immediately by Colonel Harrison himself, who had driven directly from the control tower to personally congratulate the young navigator who had just pulled off a miracle. "Sergeant Santos," Colonel Harrison said as he entered the cockpit, his voice filled with genuine amazement. "I've been flying for 35 years and I've never seen anything like what you just did. That was absolutely extraordinary." Maria looked up at him with exhausted eyes that were beginning to show the emotional impact of what she had endured. "I just did what you told me to do, sir. I couldn't have done it without your help." "No, Sergeant," Harrison replied firmly. "I gave you instructions, but you flew that aircraft. You made every control input, fought every asymmetric force, and executed that landing. That was all you." Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Chen were being assessed by Czech medical personnel, both men now fully conscious, but still weak from their hypoxia experience.
Czech doctors confirmed that both pilots would make full recoveries, but they would need several hours of observation and oxygen therapy before being cleared for duty. As Maria finally unbuckled herself from the pilot's seat, she realized her hands were cramped into claws from gripping the controls so tightly for so long. Dr. Walsh helped her stretch her fingers and massaged her shoulders, which had locked up from the constant physical strain of controlling the damaged aircraft. "Maria," Dr. Walsh said quietly, "do you realize what you just did? You saved all our lives. Without your actions, we would never have made it to Prague." The medical team from the cargo bay gathered around Maria, each of them wanting to thank her personally. These were experienced military medical personnel who had served in combat zones and understood the gravity of what had just occurred. Their respect for the young navigator was evident in their faces and words. But even as congratulations poured in, Maria's mind was already focused on the next challenge. They were stranded in Prague with a damaged aircraft, medical supplies that needed to reach their destination, and a mission that remained incomplete. Her sense of duty and responsibility hadn't diminished despite her heroic landing. "Colonel Harrison," she asked, "what's the procedure for getting our cargo to its destination? Those medical supplies are critically needed." Harrison smiled at her question. "Sergeant, you've just survived one of the most challenging aviation emergencies on record. Most people would be thinking about rest and recovery, not completing the mission. With respect, sir, people are counting on these supplies. We can't just abandon the mission because we had mechanical problems." This response perfectly captured Maria's character. The same dedication and sense of purpose that had enabled her to land the aircraft was now driving her to ensure their humanitarian mission was completed. It was exactly the kind of thinking that had impressed Captain Mitchell when he'd first requested her for his crew. Within hours, the story of Maria's emergency landing was spreading throughout the international aviation community. Prague airport officials were calling it one of the most remarkable feats of airmanship they had ever witnessed. The Czech media had picked up the story, and by evening, news organizations across Europe were reporting on the American navigator who had saved 8 lives through skill and determination. But the immediate challenge was practical rather than publicity-related. The C-130 had suffered significant damage beyond the engine failures. The violent maneuvers during the emergency had stressed the airframe, and several systems needed inspection and repair before the aircraft could fly again. More importantly, they needed to arrange alternative transportation for their critical medical cargo. The solution came from an unexpected source. The Czech Air Force, impressed by Maria's actions and understanding the humanitarian nature of their mission, offered to transport the medical supplies using one of their own aircraft. Within 12 hours, Czech pilots would complete the delivery that Maria's crew had started in Germany. "This is how the aviation community works," Colonel Harrison explained to Maria as they watched Czech ground crews carefully transferring the medical supplies to a Czech Air Force transport. That evening, as Maria sat in a Prague hotel room provided by the airport, she had time to process what had happened. She called her parents in Texas, struggling to find words to explain the day's events. Her father, the man who had once questioned whether the Air Force was any place for a woman, was speechless when she described her emergency landing. "Maria," her mother said through tears, "I can't even imagine the courage it took." The conversation with her parents helped Maria understand the magnitude of her achievement. In the midst of the emergency, she had been purely focused on survival and completing each task as it arose. Only now could she appreciate that she had accomplished something truly extraordinary. Captain Mitchell, now recovered enough for conversation, visited Maria's hotel room that evening. His color had returned to normal, and the oxygen therapy had eliminated all the effects of his hypoxia experience. "Maria," he said, settling into a chair across from her, "I need you to understand something. What you did today wasn't just exceptional flying. It was exceptional leadership. When both Chen and I were incapacitated, you didn't panic, you didn't give up, and you didn't wait for someone else to take charge. You stepped up and took responsibility for 8 lives." "I was just doing my job, sir," Maria replied, though her voice carried a new note of confidence that hadn't been there before the emergency. "No, Sergeant, you went far beyond your job. Your job was navigation. flying a damaged aircraft through an emergency landing while coordinating with air traffic control and managing a medical emergency? That wasn't your job. That was you rising to meet an impossible challenge.
The next morning brought a parade of visitors to Maria's hotel room. Representatives from the Czech government wanted to thank her personally for her professionalism in handling the emergency over their airspace. Prague airport officials presented her with a commemorative plaque recognizing her achievement. But the visit that meant the most to Maria came from an unexpected source. Dr. Petra Novak, the head of the medical facility that was to receive their cargo, had flown to Prague specifically to meet Maria. Dr. Novak explained that the medical supplies Maria had been carrying would have equipped a field hospital treating refugees from a recent regional conflict. Miss Santos, Dr. Novak said in accented English, "Because of your actions yesterday, we will be able to provide medical care to over 200 displaced families. Children who might have died from treatable conditions will now receive the care they need." This was the moment when the full significance of Maria's actions became clear to her. She hadn't just saved the 8 people on her aircraft. She had ensured that life-saving medical care would reach hundreds of refugees who desperately needed it. The mission that had started as routine cargo transport had become a humanitarian success story thanks to her determination to complete it despite impossible circumstances. Word of Maria's achievement had also reached the highest levels of the U.S. Air Force. General Patricia Williams, the same recruiter who had inspired Maria to join the Air Force during that high school career day, called personally to congratulate her former recruit. "Maria," General Williams said during their phone conversation, "do you remember what I told you during that career day presentation? I said we needed navigators who could think on their feet and stay calm under pressure. I had no idea how prophetic those words would be." "I remember that conversation like it was yesterday, ma'am," Maria replied. "You changed my life that day." Well, yesterday, you changed the lives of everyone on that aircraft. The entire Air Force is proud of what you accomplished. The official investigation into the incident began immediately, led by a joint team of U.S. and Czech aviation safety experts. The investigators needed to understand exactly what had caused the dual-engine failures and the pressurization system malfunction that had incapacitated both pilots. Maria spent hours with the investigation team, walking them through every detail of the flight, from takeoff to landing. Her navigator's training in precise observation and documentation proved invaluable. She could recall specific times, altitudes, airspeed readings, and control inputs with remarkable accuracy. Sergeant Santos, the lead investigator, noted, "Your recall of events and technical details is extraordinary. Most people in high-stress situations have fragmented memories, but you seem to remember everything with perfect clarity." Navigation training teaches you to pay attention to details. During the emergency, I was constantly monitoring instruments, calculating fuel consumption, and tracking our position. I guess that training kicked in automatically. The investigation revealed that a manufacturing defect in one of the engine oil pumps had caused the initial failure of engine number 3. The violent failure had created debris that damaged engine number 1, leading to its subsequent failure. Most critically, the investigators discovered that flying debris had severed a pressurization line, causing the gradual oxygen deprivation that had incapacitated both pilots. This was a cascade failure, the chief investigator explained to Maria. One problem led to another, which led to another. The odds of all these systems failing simultaneously are millions to 1. The fact that you were able to manage all these emergencies while learning to fly the aircraft is unprecedented. The technical analysis also revealed something that amazed even experienced pilots.
Maria's landing had been so precise that it fell within normal parameters for a routine training flight. Despite never having piloted a C-130 before, despite fighting asymmetric thrust for 2 hours, despite the physical and mental stress of the emergency, she had executed a textbook landing that would have earned high marks in any pilot training program. Meanwhile, the media attention surrounding Maria's story continued to grow. Aviation magazines around the world featured her story, and she received letters from pilots, navigators, and aviation enthusiasts expressing their admiration for her achievement. One letter that particularly moved her came from a group of young women considering military careers. "Your story shows us that we can do anything we set our minds to. You prove that women belong in aviation and that we're capable of handling any challenge that comes our way." This aspect of her story, as an inspiration to other women in aviation, was something Maria hadn't initially considered. But as she read letter after letter from young women who had been inspired by her actions, she began to understand that her achievement carried significance beyond the immediate emergency. Captain Mitchell and Lieutenant Chen had both recovered fully from their hypoxia experience and were eager to resume flying duties. However, the investigation had grounded them temporarily while medical experts evaluated the long-term effects of their oxygen deprivation. This meant that Maria's crew would be staying in Prague for at least another week. "Actually, I'm glad for the extra time here," Mitchell told Maria over dinner at their hotel. "It gives me a chance to really understand what happened yesterday. Reading the investigation reports and talking to Colonel Harrison has helped me appreciate just how remarkable your performance was." "I keep telling everyone I just did what needed to be done," Maria replied, though she was beginning to accept that her actions had been truly exceptional. "Maria, you need to understand that doing what needs to be done in a situation like that is the definition of heroism. Heroes aren't people who feel no fear. They're people who act despite their fear to help others." That evening, Maria walked through Prague's historic city center, reflecting on the events of the past 2 days. The medieval architecture and cobblestone streets provided a peaceful contrast to the intensity she had experienced. For the first time since the emergency, she allowed herself to truly absorb what had happened and what it meant for her future. 3 days after the emergency landing, Maria received a call that would change the trajectory of her military career. Colonel Sarah Henderson from Air Force Personnel Command was on the line with an offer that Maria had never expected. "Sergeant Santos, your actions over Prague have been reviewed at the highest levels of the Air Force," Colonel Henderson began. "We would like to offer you the opportunity to attend pilot training. Your demonstrated airmanship and decision-making ability suggest you would excel as a pilot." Maria was stunned. Pilot training had been her dream since childhood, but as a navigator, she had accepted that her path was different. The Air Force pilot training program was notoriously selective, accepting. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the offer, but I love being a navigator," Maria replied honestly. "I've found my place in the Air Force and I'm good at what I do." "We know you're an exceptional navigator," Colonel Henderson continued, "but yesterday you demonstrated that you're also a natural pilot. The Air Force needs officers who can excel in multiple roles, and you've proven you have that capability." The decision wasn't easy. Navigation had been Maria's calling, her expertise, and her source of professional identity. She had spent 3 years building relationships, gaining experience, and establishing herself as one of the Air Force's most reliable navigators. Starting over in pilot training would mean leaving that behind and beginning again as a student. Captain Mitchell, when she discussed the offer with him, had clear advice. "Maria, you should do whatever makes you happiest. But from a professional standpoint, your flying ability yesterday was instinctive. You have natural pilot skills that can't be taught." Lieutenant Chen agreed. "The way you handled those controls, the way you felt what the aircraft was telling you, that's not something you learn in ground school. That's natural ability." Over the following days, Maria wrestled with the decision while continuing to participate in the ongoing investigation.
The technical analysis had revealed additional details about her performance that even she hadn't fully appreciated. "Sergeant, your control inputs during the emergency were remarkably smooth," the chief test pilot reviewing the data explained. "Most people in high-stress situations make jerky, over-controlled movements. Your inputs show the kind of finesse we look for in experienced pilots." The flight data recorder had captured every control movement Maria had made during the 2-hour emergency. When graphed and analyzed, her input showed a pattern of steady improvement as she learned to manage the damaged aircraft's unique handling characteristics. "You can actually see her getting better at flying the airplane as the emergency progressed," the analyst noted. By the time she started her approach to Prague, her control technique was almost identical to what we'd expect from a pilot with hundreds of hours in the aircraft. This technical validation of her flying ability helped Maria understand that her success hadn't just been luck or adrenaline. She had demonstrated genuine pilot skills that could be developed into a full aviation career. The decision became even more complex when she learned about the broader impact of her story. The Air Force was using her achievement as a recruiting tool, particularly to encourage more women to consider aviation careers. Her story was being featured in recruitment materials and career fair presentations across the country. "You've become a role model whether you intended it or not," General Williams explained during another phone call. "Young women see your story and realize that they can succeed in aviation careers. That's a responsibility as well as an honor." Maria began to understand that her choice would affect more than just her own career. If she accepted pilot training, it would send a message that exceptional performance could open unexpected doors. If she remained in navigation, it would demonstrate that fulfillment could be found in any career path through excellence and dedication. The breakthrough in her decision-making process came during a conversation with Dr. Novak, the physician whose medical facility had received their cargo. Dr. Novak had returned to Prague to check on Maria's recovery and to provide an update on how the medical supplies were being used. "Maria," Dr. Novak said, "the supplies you delivered are saving lives every day. But more importantly, your story is inspiring people throughout our region. They see that one person faced with an impossible situation can make a difference through courage and skill." "But I was just doing my job," Maria protested, using the phrase that had become her standard response to praise. "No," Dr. Novak replied firmly. "Your job was navigation. Everything else you did, taking control of the aircraft, coordinating with air traffic control, executing that landing, that was you choosing to take responsibility for outcomes beyond your assigned duties. That's leadership." This conversation helped Maria realize that her decision about pilot training wasn't really about choosing between navigation and flying. It was about choosing how she wanted to use her talents to serve others and inspire the next generation of women in aviation. That evening, she called her parents to discuss the decision. Her father, still amazed by her emergency landing, had a simple perspective. "Maria, you've already proven you can do anything you set your mind to. The question is what you want to do." Her mother was more direct. "Sweetheart, 3 days ago you saved 8 lives by learning to fly in the middle of an emergency. If you can do that, you can certainly succeed in pilot training." The next morning, Maria made her decision. She would accept the offer to attend pilot training, not because navigation wasn't fulfilling, but because she had discovered abilities she didn't know she possessed. More importantly, she wanted to use her story to encourage other women to pursue their dreams in aviation. "Colonel Henderson, this is Sergeant Santos. I'd like to accept the pilot training offer." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Outstanding, Sergeant! Welcome to the next chapter of your Air Force career."
6 months later, Maria Santos was halfway through pilot training at Vance Air Force Base in Oklahoma. The transition from experienced navigator to student pilot had been both challenging and humbling, but her performance was exceptional. Her instructors noted that she possessed an unusual combination of technical knowledge and natural flying ability that made her ideally suited for military aviation. Santos has the best air sense of any student I've taught in 15 years, her primary instructor, Major Robert Kim, wrote in her evaluation. She approaches flying with the precision of a navigator and the instincts of a natural pilot. Her emergency landing in Prague wasn't luck. It was a demonstration of abilities she's continuing to develop here. The story of her emergency landing had become part of Air Force folklore, taught in navigation schools and emergency procedures courses, as an example of outstanding airmanship and decision-making under pressure. But Maria was careful not to let her fame interfere with her training. She approached each lesson with the same dedication and attention to detail that had made her an exceptional navigator. Her fellow student pilots initially seemed intimidated by her reputation, but Maria quickly earned their respect through her willingness to help others and her humble approach to learning. Despite her emergency landing experience, she never acted as if she already knew how to fly. She listened to every instructor, practiced every maneuver, and studied every procedure with the thoroughness that characterized everything she did. Maria treats every training flight like it's the most important mission of her career, observed another student pilot. She's already proven she can handle the most extreme emergencies, but she still takes notes on basic procedures and asks questions about standard maneuvers. The media attention surrounding her story had gradually shifted from the dramatic details of the emergency landing to the broader implications of her achievement. Aviation publications featured articles about her transition to pilot training, and she was invited to speak at several industry conferences about crisis management and the importance of comprehensive training for all aircrew members. During one such speaking engagement at the Women in Aviation International Conference, Maria addressed an audience of over 500 women involved in various aspects of aviation. Her message was simple but powerful. Preparation, professionalism, and persistence could overcome any obstacle. I didn't land that C-130 in Prague because I was special or heroic. I succeeded because my training had prepared me for the unexpected. Every hour I spent studying navigation procedures, every emergency drill we practiced, every bit of knowledge I gained about aircraft systems, all of that came together when it mattered most. The audience response was overwhelming. After her presentation, dozens of young women approached her to discuss their own aviation career goals. Many mentioned that her story had convinced them to pursue pilot training or other technical roles they had previously considered beyond their reach. One conversation particularly moved Maria. A high school senior named Jennifer Walsh, sharing a name with the doctor who had helped during the emergency, explained that she had changed her college major from education to aeronautical engineering after reading about Maria's story. "I always loved airplanes but thought engineering was too hard for me," she explained. "When I read about what you accomplished, I realized that if you could learn to fly a C-130 during an emergency, I could certainly learn to design them." These interactions helped Maria understand that her emergency landing had implications far beyond the 8 lives saved that day in Prague. Her story was inspiring women to pursue careers they might never have considered, changing the demographics of an industry that had traditionally been male-dominated. Back at pilot training, Maria was excelling in all phases of the curriculum. Her ground school scores were among the highest in her class, reflecting her strong technical background from navigation training. Her flying grades were equally impressive, with instructors noting her smooth control techniques and exceptional situational awareness. Maria approaches every flight with the level of preparation that's unusual for a student pilot, Major Kim observed. She studies each mission thoroughly, anticipates potential problems, and always has backup plans ready. It's clear that her emergency landing experience taught her the importance of being prepared for anything. The most challenging aspect of pilot training for Maria wasn't the flying or the academics. It was adjusting to being a student again after 3 years as an experienced navigator. She had become accustomed to being the expert on her previous cruise, the person others turned to for answers. Now she was learning fundamentals and making the same mistakes as any beginning pilot. "It's actually been good for me," she reflected during a phone conversation with Captain Mitchell, who had returned to flying duties and was following her progress closely. "Being a student again reminds me that there's always more to learn, always ways to improve."
Captain Mitchell had news of his own. The Air Force had assigned him to a special duty position, developing new emergency procedures based on lessons learned from their Prague incident. His experience with Maria's emergency landing was being used to improve training for all aircrew members. "Your actions that day are still saving lives," he told her. "The procedures we're developing based on what happened will help other crews handle similar emergencies. You didn't just land an airplane, you contributed to aviation safety in ways that will benefit people for years to come." As Maria approached the final phases of pilot training, she began to consider her future assignments. The Air Force had indicated that she would have considerable choice in her next duty station, a recognition of her exceptional performance, both as a navigator and as a student pilot. But regardless of where she was assigned, Maria knew that the experience over Prague had fundamentally changed her approach to her military career. She was no longer content to simply execute assigned duties competently. She wanted to push boundaries, take on challenges, and continue developing her abilities to their fullest potential.
2 years after her emergency landing in Prague, Captain Maria Santos, she had been commissioned as an officer upon completing pilot training, was assigned as a C-130 pilot with the 61st Airlift Squadron at Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now flying the same type of aircraft she had once landed during that harrowing emergency, but now as a fully qualified aircraft commander. Her reputation had preceded her to Little Rock. Every pilot and navigator in the squadron knew her story, and many of the senior officers had followed her progress through pilot training with keen interest. But Maria was determined to be judged on her current performance, not past achievements. "Santos, welcome to the 61st, said Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Hayes, the squadron commander, during Maria's initial interview. "I'm sure you're tired of people bringing up Prague, so let me be direct. You're here because you're an exceptional pilot, not because you're famous. I expect you to maintain the same standards that made you successful as a navigator and during your emergency landing." "Thank you, ma'am," Maria replied. "I appreciate being evaluated on my current abilities rather than past events." Colonel Hayes smiled. "That said, your experience gives you a unique perspective on emergency procedures that will benefit this entire squadron. I'd like you to work with our standardization and evaluation team to review our emergency training programs." This additional responsibility suited Maria perfectly. She had always been most comfortable when she could contribute her expertise to help others improve their skills and knowledge. Working on emergency procedures would allow her to share the hard-won lessons from her Prague experience while continuing to develop as a pilot. Her first few months at Little Rock were focused on upgrading to aircraft commander status. Despite her dramatic introduction to the C-130, Maria still needed to complete all the normal training requirements to become a qualified pilot in command. Her instructors noted that she approached each lesson with unusual intensity, often asking detailed questions about emergency procedures that went well beyond the standard curriculum. "Maria treats every training flight like she's preparing for another emergency," observed Major Steve Johnson, her instructor pilot. "She knows that her Prague landing was successful partly because of luck, and she's determined to eliminate luck from the equation through thorough preparation." During one training flight, they simulated an engine failure scenario similar to what Maria had experienced over Prague. As they worked through the emergency checklist, Maria's handling of the aircraft was flawless, but her instructor noticed something interesting in her technique. "Santos, you're compensating for asymmetric thrust differently than most pilots. Your control inputs are much smoother, almost like you've dealt with this exact emergency before." "I have, sir," Maria replied with a slight smile. "Muscle memory from Prague, I guess." The simulation exercise revealed that Maria's emergency landing experience had given her an intuitive understanding of how aircraft behaved under extreme conditions that couldn't be taught in normal training. Her ability to recognize and respond to unusual flight characteristics was exceptional, making her particularly valuable for training other pilots in emergency procedures. Word of her exceptional skills reached beyond Little Rock. The Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California extended an invitation for Maria to attend their program, which would qualify her to test new aircraft and systems. It was one of the most prestigious assignments available to Air Force pilots, typically reserved for officers with extensive flying time and exceptional technical abilities. The invitation surprised Maria. Test pilot school was usually offered to pilots with significantly more flight time than she had accumulated. When she asked Colonel Hayes about the unusual invitation, the explanation was illuminating. Maria, test pilots need to be able to handle aircraft in unusual configurations and emergency situations. Your Prague experience demonstrated exactly those abilities. The test pilot school wants pilots who can remain calm and analytical when aircraft don't behave normally, and you've already proven you can do that under the most extreme conditions. The decision to accept test pilot school required careful consideration. Maria loved flying the C-130 and had found her role in emergency procedures training deeply fulfilling. But the opportunity to contribute to aircraft development and safety testing was compelling, especially given her interest in improving aviation safety based on her own experiences. After discussing the opportunity with her mentors, including Captain Mitchell, now Major Mitchell, and General Williams, Maria decided to accept the test pilot school invitation. Her reasoning was characteristic. She could have the greatest impact on aviation safety by helping to develop and test new aircraft systems that would prevent the kind of emergencies she had experienced. Maria's decision to attend test pilot school makes perfect sense, Major Mitchell commented when she informed him of her choice. She's always been driven by the desire to help others, and test flying will allow her to contribute to aircraft safety for decades to come. The months leading up to her departure for Edwards Air Force Base were filled with intense preparation. Test pilot school was notoriously demanding, requiring exceptional skills in mathematics, engineering, aircraft systems, and flying technique. Maria approached the preparation with her characteristic thoroughness, studying advanced aerodynamics and aircraft design principles during every spare moment. Her colleagues at Little Rock organized a farewell celebration that highlighted how much she had contributed to the squadron during her short time there. The emergency procedures training program she had helped develop was already being adopted by other C-130 units across the Air Force, potentially preventing future accidents and saving lives. In 2 years here, Maria has made our entire squadron better pilots, Colonel Hayes said during the farewell ceremony. She shared her knowledge freely, trained our instructors in advanced emergency procedures, and set an example of professionalism that everyone has tried to emulate. During her final flight at Little Rock, a routine training mission that took her over some of the same terrain she had flown as a navigator, Maria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. 4 years ago, she was a navigator focused on charts and calculations. Now she was preparing to become a test pilot, one of the most demanding and prestigious roles in military aviation. The transformation had been remarkable, but Maria understood that each step had built upon the previous one. Her attention to detail as a navigator had prepared her for the precision required in pilot training. Her emergency landing experience had given her the confidence to handle unusual situations that would be routine in test flying. Most importantly, her commitment to helping others had ensured that every achievement had benefited not just herself, but the broader aviation community.
5 years after her emergency landing in Prague, Major Maria Santos graduated from the Air Force Test Pilot School as the honor graduate of her class. Her final test project had involved evaluating new emergency procedures for transport aircraft, a fitting culmination of her journey from navigator to test pilot that had begun with her own emergency over the Austrian Alps. The graduation ceremony at Edwards Air Force Base was attended by some of the most distinguished figures in military and civilian aviation. Among the guests was Colonel William Harrison, the retired C-130 pilot who had talked Maria through her emergency landing. His presence was particularly meaningful, as he had become something of a father figure to Maria throughout her career development. Maria, Colonel Harrison said after the ceremony, when I guided you through that landing in Prague, I knew you had exceptional potential, but I never imagined you'd become one of the Air Force's premier test pilots in such a short time. I couldn't have done any of this without your help that day, sir, Maria replied. You gave me the confidence to believe I could fly that airplane, and that confidence has carried me through everything since. Maria's test pilot school thesis had focused on developing new training protocols for handling multiple system failures in transport aircraft. Her research had analyzed hundreds of emergency scenarios and proposed training methods that would better prepare crews for the kind of cascade failures she had experienced over Prague. The thesis attracted attention throughout the aviation community because it combined theoretical analysis with real-world experience in a way that few academic papers could match. Maria had lived through the exact scenarios she was analyzing, giving her insights that purely theoretical researchers couldn't replicate. Major Santos has contributed something truly unique to aviation safety, said Dr. Robert Chen, the chief of flight test at Edwards. Her combination of practical experience and analytical ability has produced research that will influence pilot training for decades to come. Upon graduation, Maria was assigned to the 412th Test Wing at Edwards, where she would be responsible for testing new variants of the C-130 and other transport aircraft. Her first project involved evaluating improvements to engine fire suppression systems, upgrades that had been developed partly in response to the type of failure she had experienced years earlier. The irony of testing systems designed to prevent her own type of emergency wasn't lost on Maria. In a very real sense, her career had come full circle, from experiencing an emergency to preventing similar emergencies for future aircrew. Her work as a test pilot quickly established her reputation as one of the most thorough and analytical pilots in the Air Force test community. Her approach to flight testing combined the methodical precision of her navigator background with the hands-on skills she had developed as a pilot and the real-world perspective gained from her emergency experience. Maria approaches every flight test like it might be her only chance to gather critical data, observed her flight test director. She's incredibly thorough in her preparation and remarkably calm during unusual flight conditions. When an aircraft behaves unexpectedly during testing, she's always ready with immediate analysis and recommendations. During one particular flight test, Maria was evaluating new flight control systems when the aircraft experienced an unexpected malfunction that caused severe control problems. Instead of immediately terminating the flight test, she carefully analyzed the malfunction while maintaining aircraft control, gathering valuable data about the system's failure modes. That's exactly the kind of analytical thinking under pressure that we need in test pilots, the project engineer noted after reviewing her flight test report. She turned a potentially dangerous malfunction into valuable data that will make the system safer for operational use. Maria's reputation extended beyond the test pilot community. She was invited to speak at aviation safety conferences around the world, sharing her experiences and insights with commercial and military pilots. Her presentation style was engaging and practical, focusing on the importance of comprehensive training and emergency preparedness. During one international conference in London, she met Dr. Petra Novak again, the physician whose medical facility had received the cargo Maria had been carrying during her emergency flight. Dr. Novak provided an update that brought Maria's story full circle. Maria, Dr. Novak said, I wanted you to know that the medical supplies you delivered that day have now been used to treat over 2,000 refugees. But more importantly, your story inspired several young women in our region to pursue careers in aviation and engineering. One of them just graduated from university as an aeronautical engineer. This news reinforced for Maria that her achievements had impact far beyond her own career. The emergency landing that had seemed like a single dramatic event was continuing to influence people years later, inspiring others to pursue careers they might never have considered. As Maria continued her work as a test pilot, she never lost sight of the lessons learned during those harrowing hours over Prague.
Every test flight, every evaluation report, every safety recommendation was informed by her understanding that aviation safety depended on thorough preparation, comprehensive training, and the ability to remain calm and analytical during extreme situations. Her career had taken her from being dismissed as just cargo to becoming one of the Air Force's most respected test pilots. But the transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal. The young navigator who had doubted her abilities that morning in Germany had become a confident leader who inspired others to pursue their dreams, regardless of obstacles. The story of Maria Santos demonstrates that heroism isn't about seeking dramatic moments or extraordinary circumstances. True heroism lies in the daily commitment to excellence, the willingness to help others, and the courage to take on challenges that seem impossible. Maria's emergency landing was remarkable, not because she was superhuman, but because she was extraordinarily well prepared and willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the lives entrusted to her care. Years later, when young pilots and navigators ask Maria for career advice, her response is always the same. Focus on being the best at whatever role you're assigned. Excellence in any position prepares you for opportunities you can't imagine. And remember, there's no such thing as just cargo when you're part of a team that serves something greater than yourself. Today, Major Maria Santos continues her work as a test pilot, developing safer aircraft and training procedures that protect aircrew and passengers around the world. Her office at Edwards Air Force Base contains a small plaque from Prague Airport, a reminder of the day when a young navigator refused to accept that 8 lives would be lost to mechanical failure and human limitations. The plaque bears a simple inscription in both Czech and English, "To Major Maria Santos, who proved that heroes are made not by circumstances, but by the courage to act when action seems impossible." But perhaps the most meaningful recognition of Maria's achievement isn't found in any award or commendation. It's found in the dozens of letters she receives each year from women in aviation careers around the world, women who were inspired by her story to pursue their dreams despite obstacles and doubts. Each letter reminds Maria that her emergency landing over Prague was just the beginning of her real mission, proving that with preparation, determination, and courage, anyone can rise above the limitations others place on them. She was never just cargo. She was a professional aviator who happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right training to save lives and inspire a generation. And that story, the story of preparation meeting opportunity, of competence conquering impossible odds, of one person's refusal to accept defeat, continues to inspire aviators and dreamers around the world. Because in the end, we are all capable of far more than we imagine if we're willing to do the work, learn the skills, and step up when the moment demands our best. That's the true lesson of Maria Santos. Heroes aren't born. They're trained. And sometimes when everything goes wrong at exactly the wrong moment, that training makes all the difference between tragedy and triumph. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.